Welcome one and all to my review series for Fallout New Vegas' second story expansion, Honest Hearts. Like my Dead Money review series, this series will be a massive review broken into several videos focused on the second story expansion. Honest Hearts was something of a trendsetter for Fallout DLC, and I mean that in both positive and negative respects. Dead Money wasn't particularly well received initially, so the folks at Obsidian decided that something on the opposite end of the spectrum would be a better fit for the second expansion. Honest Hearts allows players to explore an entirely new map set in Utah, and tells the story of a faction war no doubt trying to emulate what made the base game so successful. At the center of Honest Heart's story is a character that, prior to this DLC's release, people were very excited to see as he had been hyped up in the base game. That man, of course, is Joshua Graham, but we'll get to him shortly. For now, I'd like to quickly summarize my approach to this DLC. I thought long and hard about this, and ultimately, I had two ways I could have gone about it. I could have either made entirely new characters that had shared similar attributes to those I used for Dead Money, but this time set to the recommended level of 15, or I could just use the characters that I used for the Dead Money playthroughs. I decided on the latter, as I felt it made more sense, being that this is the DLC that follows Dead Money. Plus, it helps to maintain a narrative throughline with my previous review series. I have allowed myself a bit more leeway, however. Unlike Dead Money, Honest Hearts allows the player to enter the DLC with whatever equipment they like, provided their loadout weight is at or below 75 pounds. This weight limit can be up to 100 by possessing certain perks or by convincing this idiot to leave the job, so I decided to take this permission to the nth. Not only did I get some of these characters significantly better weapons, but I also got them all implants, boosting special stats and granting some of them increased damage threshold, as well as a passive healing perk. Like Dead Money, there's a radio broadcast the player can listen to as they journey to the starting location of the DLC.
Howdy. My name is Jed Masterson, and I'm the caravan boss for the Happy Trails Caravan Company. If you're hearing this, I have a job offer for you. Happy Trails is organizing an expedition north into Utah, off the Long 15, and we need people. We're looking for caravan guards, prospectors, couriers. If you're used to humping it across the waste, straight toward trouble, we want you. If you got a pit board, we definitely want you. On the other hand, if you're a greenhorn or a city slicker spinning tales about your skills, you can kindly go hang. If we like your gumption, we'll pay you square and treat you fair. Find me, Jed Masterson, at the Northern Passage if you're interested. Luck to you.
This broadcast is essentially a sales pitch, offering whoever joins the Happy Trails Caravan Company pay for helping them reach a place called Zion out in Utah. It's a pretty standard radio broadcast, nothing really too significant, but I don't really think it needs to be. The Sierra Madre broadcast was intentionally vague and misleading, not just to the player, but to any character that would have heard it, and there were reasons for that. This broadcast is coming from a guy in charge of a caravan company. He's giving a sales pitch and specifying the caravan company's needs. Also, you may recognize this man, Jed Masterson's voice. That, my friends, is none other than Dave Fennoy. Dave has a massive filmography, but I personally know him best as Lee Everett from Telltale's Walking Dead Season 1, Warlord O'Keefe and a handful of other minor characters from Mass Effect 2, and Howard, the guy that likes birds from Insomniac Spider-Man games. I love this guy. I love this man. I love his voice. Dave Fennoy, you are a treasure. So after arriving at the Northern Passage, the player can talk to Jed as well as one of the caravan guards, Stella, and this guy, Ricky. Stella is basically a window peering straight from New Vegas into Fallout 2. She's from New Reno and has traveled all the way from there to here. She's not exactly a complex character, but I do appreciate her inclusion and I enjoyed talking to her about her past. Ricky, on the other hand, is pretty uninteresting. He's a psycho addict that the player can convince to leave by bullying him, or they can convince him to stay by selling him drugs. Or they can just, leave him alone. Ultimately, it's very inconsequential. You'll see why eventually. I actually got the idea to try and kill him with one of my morally dubious characters, and that's when a certain thing that I really do not like happened for what I think is the first time I've ever even witnessed in New Vegas, and boy was it jarring. All of the characters here are completely invincible and will not react to attacks from the player at all. This is utterly bizarre to me. Some of you might hear that and think, well, of course, the player can't just get there by themselves, but there's no reason that shouldn't be the case. The only two things making the journey somewhat difficult would be the trek itself and needing a map to get there. I would frankly be baffled if nobody in the Northern Passage had a damn map for getting there, and we already know that the courier can walk all the way back to the Mojave from the Sierra Madre, and the journey from New Vegas to Zion National Park is almost half the distance. So there is no reason for the player not to be able to go there alone. Hell, the courier can even go to and from Zion after the DLC's been finished, whenever they like, and all they needed was a map. So already there are a few things about this DLC that have rubbed me the wrong way. But hey, you know what, it's fine, I know the DLC hasn't really started yet, so I'll reserve judgment for now. But still, there's no denying that there's an immersion-breaking disconnect going on here. It's a long road from Vegas to Zion, so while I've got you here, I figure I can tell you a thing or two about everything leading up to the events of Honest Hearts.
The paths we're following are slow going, so you might as well keep your ears open and listen to what old Jed has to say. A few decades back, folks in the NCR started to hear about a community in northern Utah called New Canaan. Didn't know much about them, except that they were religious folks, sent out missionaries to talk to the tribes. We've seen our share of cults, but the New Canaanites, they were honest traders. Good fighters, too. Raiders wouldn't tangle with them. But then, the Legion appeared in Arizona. I reckon you know all about them. Turns out Caesar's first war chief, the Malpace Legate, was a New Canaanite, Joshua Graham. Legend goes that Graham was the meanest, toughest son of a bitch in the whole damn Legion. The New Canaanites wouldn't talk about him. They were ashamed. Guess I can't blame them. Well, at Hoover Dam, the Malpace Legate finally met his match. Hanlon and Oliver kicked his New Canaanite butt right back over the river. Caesar had to make an example for the others, to show them that even at the highest level, failure wouldn't be tolerated. He had Graham covered in pitch, lit on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. People say he didn't even scream on the way down. Not long after, some of the slaves and tribals started to talk. Said Graham wasn't dead. Shouldn't have been any surprise. All this talk bothered Caesar, so he forbade anyone from speaking his name. Wanted to erase Joshua Graham from history. He got his wish. Joshua Graham disappeared, and in his place came legends of the burned man walking the wastes. Probably just a tribal ghost story. But New Canaan's been silent for a long time. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe the Malpace Legate is dead. Or maybe Joshua Graham did crawl out of that canyon and finally found his way back home.
The events of Honest Hearts are sort of a cross between multiple subplots. However, each of those subplots shares a single point, and that point is none other than the followers of the Apocalypse. The followers of the Apocalypse are an idyllic bunch that seek to help their neighbors and build peaceful, lasting relationships with other tribes. 35 years prior to the events of New Vegas, the followers sent 3 men out east to study the tribal dialects so that they could start communicating with them and perhaps build from there. Utah is an interesting state when it comes to the world of Fallout because prior to the conception of Caesar's Legion, it was mostly comprised of smaller tribes that were either at war with one another, such as the Blackfoots, or just kept to themselves, like the Sorrows. These tribes even had their own dialects that greatly differ from the English-speaking many players will have come to expect in post-war North America. In order to build relationships with these tribes, the followers enlisted the help of a man named Joshua Graham, who grew up in Ogden, Utah, now known as New Canaan. Joshua was very familiar with the languages spoken by the various tribes of Utah and proved to be quite competent in his ability to translate. The men that joined Joshua included Bill Calhoun and Edward Sallow. Bill was a physician, and Edward was considered one of the brightest minds of the followers. During their expedition, the men came across an assortment of pre-war books, including The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, and Commentarii de Bello Gallico, a work of Julius Caesar himself. Edward took to studying these books during their journey to Utah, and, as many of you know, they had quite an influence on him. Upon arriving in Utah, the group encountered a tribe known as the Blackfoot, a small tribe on the losing end of a war with 7 others. Initial contact was actually quite peaceful, and the trio were greeted with a relatively warm welcome. However, it wasn't long before a conflict arose. It's unclear whether or not this was due to a mistranslation on the part of Joshua, betrayal by the Blackfoot, or something else entirely. Regardless, the trio were taken captive by the Blackfoot. Upon realization that the Blackfoot were on the losing end of the tribal war, Edward Sallow, not keen on going down with them, took charge, against the wishes of Bill Calhoun. Edward Sallow taught the Blackfoot how to maintain their weaponry, small unit tactics, and ultimately the rule of divide and conquer. Edward was so capable that the tribe quickly appointed him their leader, and this marked a major shift in the tribal wars going on in Utah. Edward looked down on the skirmishes that the tribes had with contempt for their lack of knowledge on war, leading the Blackfoot in a total conquest of the other tribes. This conquest saw him starting with the weakest tribe and working his way up from there, eventually blindsiding the remaining tribes with a checkmate they never saw coming. To ensure his forces were continually strengthened, Sallow would lay siege to the enemy tribes, enslave their strongest or otherwise most capable people, then have those not chosen to join him beaten to death by the others. Women, children, and the elderly were not excluded. The amalgamation of those 8 tribes would come to be known as the Legion, with Edward Sallow taking on the title of Caesar. As for the other 2 men that accompanied Sallow, Bill Calhoun was luckily spared and instructed to return to the followers of the Apocalypse and inform them of Sallow's new role as Caesar of the Legion. Joshua Graham, however, went down a very different road. During the time of the tribal wars, Joshua Graham served as translator for Sallow, no doubt eventually transitioning from this to giving orders himself, which would then of course turn into him leading the charge. Joshua Graham is an exceptional soldier and a gifted speaker and translator, and Sallow recognized this, offering Joshua the position of Malpace Legate of the Legion. Joshua of course declined and, what's that? He accepted. Why the fuck would he do that? I mean, I guess it could be argued that his passion for the tribes made him feel obligated to stay, but I don't know, that feels like something worth elaborating on. It definitely wasn't a fear of Sallow, since Joshua could easily deal with him while still remaining on good terms with the tribes. Hell, he could have probably taken over if he wanted to. So what the fuck was this guy thinking? He tells the courier that nobody but Caesar can lead the Legion, and he's fully aware that Caesar is a time bomb waiting to go off, so maybe he was afraid of carrying the responsibility of the Legion breaking down, and most likely succumbing to infighting. But you think there would be mention of this? We can speculate all day, but ultimately, why Joshua Graham chose to take on the role of Malpace Legate is a cold case, which is kind of a shame considering it's literally the single most important decision this character has ever made in his life. That being said, Joshua was very successful as the legate for some time, leading the Legion to conquer a number of tribes as they carved a path across the east, not the least of which included the Twisted Hares, a tribe from Arizona that occupied dry wells, a patch of land along the Colorado River. Caesar would initially forge an alliance with the Twisted Hares only to break it, with Vulpes and Culta acting as his Judas. After conquering every other tribe of Arizona, Caesar turned on the Twisted Hares and enslaved them, exterminating their history and identity and crucifying all who resisted. One member of the Twisted Hares, a man known as Ulysses, would be recognized for his exceptional survival skills, eventually being granted the title of Legion Frumentarius, a unique select of men who act as spies for Caesar. As it turns out, it was Ulysses that first crossed the Colorado and discovered Hoover Dam, a discovery that would lead to the Legion's most significant conflict they ever had, that being with the New California Republic. Conflict between the Legion and NCR was all but inevitable. Caesar himself describes the Legion as the antithesis of the NCR, claiming it's inevitable that he destroy them, and establishing a hold on Hoover Dam would make it all but impossible to stop his Legion from conquering the region. Things would seemingly fall into Caesar's favor with the destruction of Hopeville, an important supply line for the NCR that they relied on for sending troops and reinforcements. Following this, Caesar saw the opportunity and pushed to attack Hoover Dam, with Joshua Graham leading the charge as he always did. Unfortunately for the Legion, the NCR were more than ready thanks to the leadership of General Lee Oliver. Caesar's Legion typically carries out large-scale battles by sending wave after wave of men, with the youngest taking the helm while the veterans push from behind. You know, that sounds a lot like their camp culture now that I think about it. To counter this, the NCR essentially baited the Legion into points of vulnerability, with Rangers and 1st Recon picking Legion soldiers off at a steady pace as the NCR continued to lure the Legion further in. The culmination of this conflict occurred at a small town known as Boulder City, where the NCR had set up dozens upon dozens of C4. By the time Legion got to Boulder City, all that remained were their veterans, who undoubtedly expected to have the advantage in close quarters engagement, but the NCR was long gone, and the Legion's most capable and proud soldiers fell with Boulder City. By this point, Joshua Graham was forced to retreat back to Caesar with the remainder of his men. As you can probably imagine, Caesar was furious with this defeat, and was not about to let Joshua go unpunished. Caesar would take Joshua to the Grand Canyon for his execution, where Legion men covered Joshua in pitch, lit him on fire, and hurled him over the edge of the cliff, falling for over a mile to the very bottom of the Grand Canyon. However, that's not where Joshua's story ends.
And I stayed in that darkness until after Hoover Dam. After I failed Caesar and he had me burned alive, thrown into the Grand Canyon. I survived because the fire inside burned brighter than the fire around me. I fell down into that dark chasm, but the flame burned on and on. The next morning, I woke up and crawled out of the northern edge of the Grand Canyon, that cursed place. It took me 3 months to reach New Canaan. It was as though the prodigal son had returned. They welcomed me like I had never left, never done anything to shame them. The fire that had kept me alive was love. Their love. God's love. I will never be able to repay the debt I owe to them, but I must try.
By some miraculous twist of fate, Joshua Graham would survive his fiery plunge into the Grand Canyon, waking up a day later and walking out of the chasm a burned man, reborn from the ashes of his former self. The burned man would spend the next 3 months traveling back home to New Canaan, where he was greeted with the love of a prodigal son. Following this, legends of the burned man would begin to make their way across the wasteland, eventually reaching the ears of Caesar, who would instigate a damnatio memoriae, where the very mention of the name Joshua Graham would be considered a capital offense. This, of course, only strengthened the myth of the burned man. Caesar would also send his frumentari to track down the burned man, but none that found him would return to Caesar. But not all of them completely failed in their mission. The frumentarius Ulysses would lead a tribe known as the Whitelegs to sack New Canaan when Joshua was away, perhaps on a mission trip to establish relations with another tribe. Joshua and the bulk of the New Canaanites would flee north into Utah, specifically Zion Canyon, where they would meet the Sorrows and the Dead Horses, establishing a neighborly relationship with the two tribes as they prepared for the coming of the Whitelegs. And this is where the story of Honest Hearts officially begins. After setting off with the Happy Trails caravan, Jed Masterson gives a brief recount of the legend of the burned man. Following this narration, the caravan has officially arrived at Zion Canyon, and it doesn't take long for things to take a violent turn. Immediately, the caravan is ambushed by the Whitelegs, a local tribe who possess a variety of weapons including machine guns, tomahawks, and various melee weapons including axes and even shish kebabs. We knew this was likely to happen prior to heading out of the Northern Passage, and as a player, one might think to themselves that this could play out a number of ways. Perhaps we could instruct the caravan company to lay low while we stealthily pick off the Whitelegs. Or maybe we could find an alternate route that leads to an encounter with local fauna, such as the returning Yaoguai. However, that is simply not the case. This scenario can and only will ever play out one way, and that's with the entirety of the caravan, save for the courier, being killed off by the Whitelegs. How do the developers ensure that this is always the case, I hear you ask? The last Whiteleg that spawns is completely immune to all damage until they have finished off the caravan. So no matter what you do or how well you play or how quickly you destroy the Whitelegs, it will not matter. This is pathetically cheap, and immediately detracts from the player's ability to get immersed. This is especially bad given that this is the very start of the DLC. Combine that with the issues I mentioned earlier about the NPCs in the Northern Passage, and already this DLC feels noticeably poorly manufactured. It's also embarrassingly easy to quite literally watch the Whitelegs spawn into the world as if the Thanos snap had just been undone. This whole intro is a mess. I'm fine with the generic mercs being killed off, like, whatever, but you gave me a character who seemed like she had genuine potential for some unique interactions. Not to mention Dave fucking Fenoy and this dumbass drug addict. Off the top of my head, I imagine Jed would have been great as a more sympathetic character that strives for peace and compromise, a major theme in Honest Heart's story. Or how about some more interactions with Stella? She could talk about her own experience with the tribals and the goings-on of locations from the original Fallout games. What if Ricky got involved with the Sorrows and indulged in their drugs, allowing him some hilarious character moments not unlike what you'd expect from a game like Far Cry 3, while also developing in meaningful ways as he grows to care more for the tribe and the outcome of the conflict? Look, I get it, New Vegas had a limited budget, and the DLC's even more so. I'm sympathetic towards this personally, but that doesn't change the fact that you presented 3 potentially very interesting characters, then you just set them to be killed off in a way that is immersion-breaking to the point that it's actually cringeworthy. Hell, in Ricky's case, he can't even be found in the wasteland if you convince him to abandon the caravan. Once he's gone from the game forever. This character could not possibly matter any less than he already does. He might as well not even exist. It's just mind-boggling to me, especially after them having just been completely invincible to all forms of damage. It makes these characters come off more as voiced assets than actual characters, and for a game as renowned for its characters and world as Fallout New Vegas, that is a shame. But anyways, the player proceeds across the bridge, and it's here that they meet Follow's Chalk, a dead horse tribal sent by Joshua to scout the land for Whitelegs. Follow's Chalk is a great addition to Honest Hearts because he provides a window into how the dead horses perceive Joshua Graham. The dead horses aren't a warring tribe, but with Joshua's leadership keeping them strong and secured in the face of slaughter at the hands of the Whitelegs, it's easy to see how they would come to idolize him as they do. Follow's Chalk is also just really enjoyable to listen to as he talks about the goings-on of Zion. There's this adorable innocence in his perspective that you rarely see in the world of Fallout that really makes you wonder just how long such a thing can last, and if it's even worth preserving given the state of the world, but I'm gonna hold off on that for the time being. For now, I think it's time to call it a day. I hope you all enjoyed this introductory video and are looking forward to what's to come. Some of you may be wondering if I intend to cover all of New Vegas' expansions, and I'm excited to say with the release of this video that, yes, I intend to release videos on a regular basis, with the final part of the Lonesome Road review dropping on Christmas of this year. We've got one hell of a journey ahead of us, but I'm excited to see it through. But that'll have to do for today. Thanks for watching.